afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's May the 28th, 148th day of the year. 217 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays and observances. National Hamburger Day. National Brisket Day. World Hunger Day, National Flip-Flop Day, Menstrual Hygiene Day, Amnesty International Day, World Otter Day, National Senior Health and Fitness Day, National Time Management Month, National Passion Fruit Martini Day, National Multiple Births Awareness Day, Whooping Crane Day, whoop whoop, National Beef Burger Day, Thales Day, ancient philosopher, revolutionized early Greek thought. Republic Day in Azerbaijan, First Republic Day in Armenia, Vivid Sydney, ends on the 14th of June. Tracky Dak Day, it's a funny name for a serious cause. It's run by TLC for Kids, encourages people to wear their favorite track pants to support children in hospitals. Now, how that's going to support the children's anybody's guess, but National Children's Gardening Week, Scripps National Spelling Bee, goes on to the 29th. Garden Wildlife Week, famous people born on this date, Cameron Boyce, Michael Orr, and Seth Rollins. All right, let's see what's in the news. There's a mayor facing a backlash. There was a protest in Seattle. They got violent. And the mayor blamed Christians. Not anybody else. Evangelicals apparently led the protest. According to Dan Bongino, the FBI deputy director, freedom of religion is not a suggestion. It's a reality. They held a rally in Seattle City Hall in response to the mayor blaming Christians for igniting a weekend demonstration that turned violent. Nonprofit alleges Biden's staff secretly used the auto pen for major climate policy decisions. They found no evidence Biden knew anything about the climate executive orders. They wanted to know who signed the auto pen. It was a pro-energy group doing its call for an investigation of over half a dozen Biden administration executive actions related to climate that it believes should have been deemed null and void due to them being signed by auto pen without the president knowing anything about them. His staff, and led by Dr. Jill, just had a great time. Rubio's announced visa restrictions for foreigners. Complicit in censoring Americans. Those who undermine American free speech should enjoy the privilege of U.S. travel, and I agree with him. Secret Service altercation took place outside Obama's D.C. home. 2 officers got into a slugging match. 2 female officers, I might add. Well, Pete Buttigieg, who styles himself as an expert in the matter, reveals the top things the Democrats got wrong since losing the election. Christian Jacobs continues the Memorial Day tradition of honoring his father, Marine Sergeant Christopher Jacobs. He hugged Trump at Arlington, still dreams of becoming a Marine just like his father. West Virginia Governor vows to protect women's sports as trans athletes compete in girls' state championships. Becky Pepper Jackson has been the focus of several high-profile court cases. She's a 13-year-old freshman at Bridgeport Senior High School, who's been the subject of a Supreme Court case about participation in girls' sports. Finished 3rd in the disc event and 8th in the shot put competition. The Becky Pepper Johnson's actually a boy. Well, Diddy's defense has moved for mistrial, claiming prosecutorial misconduct. The authorities charged the rapper with multiple counts of racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, coercion, transporting for prostitution in September 2024. His former assistant, Capricorn Clark, testified Tuesday after the trial took a break for Memorial Day. Clark claimed Combs kidnapped her and forced the former assistant to go with the rapper to Kid Cudi's home after finding about his romance with Cassie Ventura. A number of fairly well-known names have been called to testify. Well, let's see. Botched crime scene handling could derail the prosecution of Orleans jail escapees, according to a former FBI agent. The DA personally led the crime scene technicians to collect evidence after the sheriff failed to preserve the scene after the 10 inmates fled the facility, which makes you wonder what the sheriff was trying to hide. Netanyahu has confirmed that Israel has killed Hamas Gaza chief Mohammed Sinwar. Previously, Netanyahu said the terrorist leader had apparently been killed. Now it seems to be a certainty. Trump says Canada is considering trading its sovereignty for being protected by the Golden Dome. Prince William plans to exile Prince Andrew when he becomes king, according to experts. And let's see what else we got. Harvard's Alan Dershowitz makes the case for Trump targeted defunding of Harvard. ICE arrest around 40, including MS-13 members in a Massachusetts island raid. ESPN's Chinny Awunganyi apologizes for comments about an alleged WNBA fan incident. Trump has ruled out a 2028 run as Republican contenders get positioned for the next race. Trump has revealed the story behind CNN anchor Jake Tapper's a little bit too late apology. Tapper previously rebuked Trump for raising concerns about Biden's mental acuity on CNN in 2020. And now Tapper's written a book about it called Original Sin. He's admitted to insufficiently reporting on Biden's health concerns. Apologized to Fox News host Laura Trump, who previously rebuked for raising concerns in 2020. And while she does appreciate the apology, she said she thinks it's a little bit too late. Well, the Justice Department has sued North Carolina over its voter rolls. They said they didn't properly maintain the voter rolls under the American Vote Act. If you had a pulse, you could register to vote, apparently. Texas sheriff reporting a dramatic decline in illegal border crossings under Trump. Angel Reese owes Feather fans an apology after the WNBA finds no evidence about any hateful remarks being made to her by Caitlin Clark, or anybody else for that matter. Well, there are still memorial deals at Walmart, Amazon, Lowe's, and a number of other stores. Harvard president says there are too few conservatives on his campus, and as a result, people are afraid to speak out. Police detained a person of interest after a shooting in a Connecticut mall left 5 people injured. They believe the Waterbury Mall shooting stemmed from a conflict that escalated, not a random act of violence. But they arrested a person of interest. Trump is going to issue a pardon for the Chrisleys, who are in prison for tax evasion and fraud. Florida man with a long criminal history was killed by deputies after he was attacked by an alligator. Well, that would upset me too. UN officials facing blood libels after DC terror attack. In fact, it's being said that they're fueling the blood libels. There are a lot of inflammatory anti-Israeli rhetoric has led to it. And let's see. Police have arrested the suspect after a fatal jet ski hit and run. The woman apparently hit. Let's see. It was an Air Force cadet. Texas Game Warden and Grapevine Police Department have Jacqueline Alejandra Gonzalez in custody. She'd been driving a jet ski that hit Ava Moore, killed her apparently. Two suspects, including the victim's husband, charged in the stabbing death at Fort Campbell. Dick Van Dyke is not quite 100. He and Ed Asner were going to redo the Odd Couple until Asner died in his 90s. Taiwan president's pledged increased U.S. purchases during a congressional visit. Let's see. Trump DOJ is vowing to eliminate anti-Semitism from the Harvard campus. Since that seems to be ingrained into Harvard philosophy, I don't think that's going to happen. Dana White and Anheuser-Busch have joined forces. They're pushing a new nutrition brand, new energy drink. Let's see. GM has invested $888 million in a Buffalo plant for the next generation of V8 engines. Apparently the order that everybody would convert over to electrical cars is a thing of the past. All right. We've been talking about a lot of deaths related to UFOs. And probably one of the best known is let's see, it has to do with the Maury Island incident. Now, Maury Island, of course, is in Tacoma, Washington. And in this case, still provokes a lot of controversy. It revolved around nothing less than a malfunctioning UFO that practically exploded in midair. And the controversial deaths of a couple of military personnel, and the near death of the most famous figures in the history of UFO. On this particular day in question, Benny and Harold Dahl was under contract to salvage lumber from the Puget Sound Harbor at South Maury Island. And he and a half a dozen co-workers and his son and their dog. Were out in the boat, and they saw at about 2,000 feet, a squadron of what would soon become known as flying saucers, all of which displayed noticeable portholes and the centers were hollowed out. There were actually 6 craft. It was the action of just one of them that caught everybody's attention. And as the father, the son, and I'm sure the dog and the crew watched, you couldn't fail to see that one of these vehicles was acting in a decided, strange way. Unlike the other one, this one seemed to be in trouble. It became even more evident when it plunged violently without warning down to about 700 feet. In fact, it was right above the boat. At that point, the remaining craft all came down, and one of them gently nudged the malfunctioning UFO. The dog decided it was trying to lend some assistance, but whatever it might have been was too late. In seconds, the stricken saucer exploded, sending a huge amount of material crashing down from the skies. Portions of this material that are described as one of 2 distinct categories: very thin, light-covered material of a metallic nature, and the other was a hot, darkly covered slag-like substance that caused the water to steam, but it slammed into the boat, injured the son, killed the dog. Now, certainly shocked and shaken and terrified, the dog immediately brought the boat back to shore. No time at all, the story got to the ears of a man named Fred Chrisman, who apparently held influence over Dahl, who also held some kind of position at the harbor, although that may possibly have been a cover for work of, shall we say, more clandestine, intelligence-based nature. In fact, during the Second World War, it turns out Chrisman actually worked for the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, forerunner of what ultimately became known as the Central Intelligence Agency. Post-war era, he was employed as an investigator for the Department of Veterans Affairs and had some still unclear links to the Atomic Energy Commission, to the extent that specifically after the Maury Island events ended, he actually started working full-time for the Atomic Energy Commission. Now, when told of the facts of what had happened by Dahl, Chrisman took steps to examine this material himself. By the time he got to the water's edge, the waves had already deposited a lot of it on the shore. And just as Dahl described it, there were 2 different types of material. And Chrisman wasted no time in scooping up portions of both and hiding them away from any prying eyes. And that's when an even stranger series of events began that ultimately ended in disaster and death. Chrisman contacted a man named Ray Palmer, editor of Amazing Stories magazine, somebody with whom Chrisman apparently had contact on matters of a paranormal and science fiction nature. And after apprising Palmer about the matter, Palmer began to appreciate the potential enormity the situation, and he got in touch with Ken Hudnall, the man who's actually gave us what we know as the flying saucer name. Now, Palmer hired Arnold to travel to Maury Island and get to the bottom of the mystery, and he wanted it done as fast as possible. Well, for his part, and with all the controversy surrounding the flying saucer mystery, Palmer was hoping when the facts were published, they'd increase the sales figures of Amazing Stories magazine. And Palmer was correct. Now, Arnold accepted the offer from Palmer and flew from Boise, Idaho to Puget Sound on the trail of this malfunctioning flying saucer. When he got there, it became apparent to Arnold that in the immediate aftermath of the strange affair, a lot of strangeness was going on in and around Maury Island. It seemed the entire locale was steeped in paranoia and fear. Dahl's life, in fact, that of his entire family had been threatened by what can only be described as the Men in Black. There was talk and a high degree of evidence that a lot of the players in the story were being subjected to telephone bugging operations, including Arnold himself once he arrived. And the military was exhibiting far more than a passing interest in the affair as well. You might ask how the military got involved. Well, after Ray Palmer hired Kenneth Arnold to look into the matter, for which Palmer paid him $200, which was a good bit of money in '47. Chatting about the Donald Chrisman claims at the office of the Idaho Daily Statesman newspaper, Arnold actually bragged about how much he'd get paid to chase down the story. And that got the editor of the newspaper thinking if Palmer was going to pay Arnold $200, there had to be something for the story. So he just sent a telegram to Air Force A2 Intelligence telling them what was going on, which opened up an entirely new chapter in the Mortar Island mystery. Wasn't long before a pair of military officers arrived. First Lieutenant Frank Mercer Brown and Captain William Lee Davidson, both assigned to Army Intelligence. Acting on the orders of U.S. Air Force General Nathan Twining, the two were ordered to figure out what on earth was going on at Mortar Island. And because Arnold was in town at the expense and request of Ray Palmer, he kept the magazine editor informed of all these developments, one of which was that Crispin handed over to Brown and Davidson portions of the debris he had collected at Puget Sound. And once they had custody of the debris, the two men were due to fly to Wright Field in Ohio, what we call Wright-Patterson Air Force Base today. And that's a place where it's long been rumored that UFO debris, craft, and even alien bodies have been held. Well, unfortunately, the two officers didn't make it to Wright Field. They didn't actually make it anywhere. Not long after the two took off from McCord Field on a B-29, their aircraft burst into flames and plunged to the ground. Both men and the crew were killed in a fire explosion near Castle, Washington. The official story was that an exhaust stack on the left wing burned out, causing both the wing and its engine to catch fire, which led to the wing breaking off. Well, suspiciously, the potentially amazing debris that Crispin had given to Brown and Davidson were never found in the wreckage. At least that's the story. And there was another disturbing development. Arnold heard tales around town the B-29 had been blasted out of the sky by a 20-millimeter cannon fired by a detachment of the military that, for whatever reason, wanted to ensure that strange debris never reached Wright Field. Well, with all by now too frightened to talk, primarily and understandably as a result of his knowing of the Man in Black and the deaths of Brown and Davidson, Crispin began acting in what was described as a shady fashion. Arnold told Palmer there was a little more he could do, and as a result, he was about to head for home. And just for good measure, UPS man, Ted Morello, warned Arnold that Arnold was in way over his head and he should leave town at the earliest opportunity. Arnold chose to follow Morello's suggestion, and he did it quickly. For Morello himself, he died shortly after that, as did an individual named Paul Lance, who was a reporter for the Tacoma Times newspaper. He had reported on the incident, and after his death, he was on the slab at the morgue for about 36 hours while the pathologists tried to figure out what had killed him. Well, as a skilled pilot, Arnold flew to Mortar Island, leaving his plane at the airfield. When he got back, he took off and stopped at Pendleton, Oregon to refuel his aircraft. Ominously and coincidentally, after leaving Pendleton, Arnold himself experienced drama when his plane began to sputter and stutter. Fortunately, he was a more than capable aviator, and he was able to safely bring his aircraft to the ground and get it stopped, and averting what could easily have been his death. Turns out his engine froze up in midair. Whoever had refueled the aircraft had left the fuel valve open. by accident or by design, Arnold never found out. He preferred to think it was accident. Whatever really happened at Maury Island resulted in the death of a dog and 2 military officers. Arnold was very thankful he didn't wind up being number 3. Now today, and I guess you could say, not surprisingly, after the Maury Island affair, the deaths of First Lieutenant Frank Brown and Captain Davidson, the near-death of Colonel Arnold, and the enigmatic involvement of Fred Chrisman, as well as the threats made to Harold Dahl by a man in black, and the missing debris, is still an unsolved mystery. Now, interestingly enough, Chrisman was involved in another UFO-related death, that of John Kennedy. We'll talk about that in a future show. Now, when it comes to matters of the infamous UFO-themed events that occurred outside of Roswell, New Mexico, in the summer of 1947, if you mention the dead bodies supposedly found, you tend to get varying reactions. The Roswell affair is attendant accounts of a crashed UFO and official cover-up led to a number of local fatalities as well. Human fatalities. They're also the ones for whom the trauma of encountering something so shocking and strange on a desert floor plunged them into such deep states of turmoil that it was actually emotional disintegration. Now, allegedly, these people committed suicide. One of these was Vern Brazil. I think I talked about that in a previous show. The son of rancher Mac Brazil found the unusual wreckage and told his story to the Roswell media. Vern was just 8 years old when this happened. Unfortunately, he became a victim of the event. Now, I know of a couple of other folks who young people who used to help Mac Brazil. And the CIC terrorized them to the point that they left back for Mexico and refused to come back. Now, it's generally acknowledged by Roswell researchers there were 3 locations on the Foster Ranch where strange material was found. A large debris site, a second location where part of the damaged vehicle was found, and a third location where a number of unusual decaying and damaged bodies were found. Newspapers at the time reported that Vern was with his father when Mac Brazil came across the main debris site. But Vern may have seen a lot more than that, including the bodies. Now, we'll know for sure. No sooner had he reached an age when he could leave home that he left New Mexico forever. Went to the Navy for a while, wandered around various parts of the U.S. And finally, while still in his mid-20s, shot himself in the head. On top of that, one of the few folks have probably claimed that Mac Brazil's death in 1963 was suicide as a result of the stress and fear provoked by what he found in 1947. And then there was D. Proctor, friend of Vern Brazil, who was just 7 at the time of the crash. He's also acknowledged to have been involved in the discovery of anomalous items on the ranch. It said he even found alien corpses. Or as his mother once said, something else. Well, there's the belief by Roswell researchers that D, who used to help Mac Brazil on the ranch, was present when Brazil made the discovery of one or more unusual decomposing bodies on the property. And young Proctor was outrageously threatened by military after the event, warned not to talk about what he'd seen. That's not in doubt. CIC just descended on the area, threatened everybody in sight. It was a trauma-filled, life-changing experience that affected and determined the rest of D. Proctor's life. He died well before his time, combined result of alcoholism and uncontrolled eating disorder. Another individual who crawled into the bottle was Major Jesse Marcel, the base intelligence officer. He helped recover at least some of the debris from the site. He also became the fall guy in the government's operation to keep everything under wraps. It was claimed that what was found was a water balloon, and Marcel was too ignorant to recognize it. Now, his son Jesse Jr. acknowledged his father's drinking problem in the wake of the crash, and that of his mother as well. Though the major was finally able to bring himself back from the brink of disaster, Elroy John Center, a chemist with the Battelle Memorial Institute, a man who's believed to secretly studied the debris found at Roswell, actually ended his days in a sanitarium. Obsessed by UFOs, addicted to booze, and described as a mere shell of his former self. And then there's Glenn Dennis, a mortician at Fowler's Funeral Home in Roswell in 1947. He claimed that right after the crash, he got a strange telephone call from the mortuary officer at the base. Asked questions about the availability of child-sized caskets that could be sealed hermetically. He also signed a sworn affidavit confirming that a nurse friend at the base admitted to him that a preliminary autopsy of the bodies had been conducted at Roswell. So the story went, his nurse entered one particular room to collect some supplies when she ran into a pair of doctors who were handling a gurney and 3 small humanoid bodies of a very strange appearance. 2 of them were very badly damaged, as if wild animals had attacked them. The heads were large, the mouths were mere slits. The nurse was positive they were not human. Now, a great deal of debate has raged for years about the veracity of Glenn Dennis's tale and his nurse, who nobody can find or identify. Well, Dennis admitted himself he had lied time and again about her real name, trying to give her some degree of anonymity. Understandably, this has given rise to the theory that Glenn Dennis simply made up the entire tale. But there is data that points to a very different direction. L.M. Hall, former chief of police in Roswell, went on record as stating that Dennis told him the story about the caskets right at the time it occurred. Similarly, Sergeant Milton Sprouse, who served at the Roswell Army Airfield in 1947, has also publicly confirmed that he heard Dennis's story shortly after it happened. The crash happened in 1947. So if it really took place, was there really a nurse? Not that it matters, but most likely candidate for that role is Miriam Bush. She wasn't really a nurse, but an executive secretary at the base hospital in July of 1947. She worked under the chief medical officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Warning. Bush's surviving families admitted that in the summer of 1947, she described to her parents the horror of seeing a number of small humanoid bodies in a room at the hospital. Unfortunately, you can't get vindication for the story from Bush herself. In the final days of 1989, Bush killed herself. At least that's the story. Now, Pat Bush, who was married to Miriam's brother George, had a different story to tell. She said Miriam Bush was frightened her whole life of what she saw at the hospital on that day. Pat Bush said that her sister-in-law's death was possibly not what it seemed to be. It was much worse. According to Pat, just before her death, Miriam checked into a hotel room, or rather curiously gave her sister's name and address instead of her own. She was afraid somebody was watching her. Though the police stated that Miriam's death was suicide, Pat had a lot of major doubts about that. Seems Miriam had bruises on her arms and a plastic bag over her head when she was found. That only increased the family's suspicions. Let's not forget that Glenn Dennis went public with this story just months before Miriam Bush died, if that's what happened. Maybe his revelations prompted somebody to have Bush removed from the equation before he had a chance to speak openly about what she really knew about Roswell. And then there's another aspect to the deaths at Roswell. one that, if true, is terrifying in its implications. Early 1990s to the final years of the 20th century, UFO researcher from Big Bear Lake, California, named Timothy Cooper, claimed contact with a wide and varied body of whistleblower-type individuals from the world government, the military, and the intelligence community. This group provided Cooper with hundreds of pages of reportedly classified documents about the Roswell incident, about crashed UFOs, dead extraterrestrials, alien autopsies, and even more. Now, that the document exists isn't in doubt. What is in doubt is whether or not they're genuine, or some form of disinformation designed to confuse the truth about Roswell. One thing you can be sure of, though, is that two of the documents refer to mysterious and disturbing deaths at one of the sites that have become linked to the Roswell legend. Documents in question are known as the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit Summary of 1947 and the Majestic 12 First Annual Report, said the date from the 1950s. Chronologically speaking, it's within the pages of these two documents we begin to learn about the alleged concern exhibited by the government, the military, and the intelligence community that alien beings actually represented a potential biological threat to the human race. According to the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit Summary, one section refers to deaths deep in the New Mexico desert at a site where at least some of the bodies were found. According to this document, ground personnel from Sandia experienced somewhat from contamination resulting in the deaths of 3 technicians. A 4th technician was made ill. Autopsies were scheduled to determine the cause of the death. Counterintelligence Corps made appropriate security file entries in the dossiers with cross-references for future review. And according to the Majestic 12 First Annual Report, biological warfare programs in the U.S. and the U.K. are in field test stages. And discovery of new virus and bacteria agents so lethal that serums derived by genetic research can launch medical science into unheard of fields of biology. The samples extracted from bodies found in New Mexico have yielded new strains of a retrovirus, not totally understood, but it does open up the door to what might be referred to as the ultimate biological warfare weapon. The danger, according to the report, lies in the spread of airborne and bloodborne outbreaks of diseases in large populations with no medical cures. Now, the document continues with respect to the reported alien technology and the bodies found at the crash site. According to what it said, the panel was concerned over the contamination of several personnel upon coming in contact with debris near the power plant. One technician was overcome and collapsed when he attempted to remove a body. Another medical technician went into a coma 4 hours after putting the body in a rubber body bag. All 4 of the technicians were rushed to Los Alamos for observation. All 4 later died of seizures and profuse bleeding. And they were wearing protective suits when they came into contact with bodily fluids from the occupants. So whatever it was very virulent. Autopsies on the 4 dead technicians did not reveal conclusive results. It's believed the 4 may have suffered from some form of toxin or highly contagious disease. Now, in April 2006, the FBI declassified into the public domain through the Freedom of Information Act portions of a fascinating and illuminating document entitled Bacterial Warfare and Bacteriological Warfare in the U.S. that covered the late 40s to into the 1950s, which is arguably one of the most significant periods in UFO history. According to the file's original 1,783 pages, and I would point out that over 1,000 have been still withheld from declassification by the FBI under the term of national security. But the remaining 700 and some odd that were released to the public domain have proven to be extremely valuable in helping to determine the full scale of the link between UFO crashes in New Mexico in 47 and alien viruses. According to what we've seen, the technicians that died when confronted by non-human bodies at one of the Roswell sites came from Sandia. And on top of that, as the FBI's official papers demonstrate, there was a curious outbreak of plague at the base viewed in some quarters as being the result of nothing less than a deliberate attempt to clandestinely introduce widespread contagion on the Sandia base by some hostile unknown sources. It's curious that the same year that crashed UFO debris was transferred to Sandia, it was an attempt made by unidentified forces to devastate the base through the introduction of a unconventional biological warfare agent. Now, it's thought this might possibly have been activities of aliens who had already directly and indirectly killed a number of technicians present at the crash site. Or it might have been some other human agents. But something with biological warfare in nature had occurred in New Mexico that subsequently led the FBI to devote countless agents, manpower, and expertise toward resolving whatever was taking place. And the FBI's concern only continued as a perfect example of this ongoing concern. Well, the FBI's emphasis was on the outbreak of exotic diseases in New Mexico during the late 40s, according to a number of reports that have turned up. Quotes the words of the director of the New Mexico State Public Health Laboratory who'd prepared a report on sudden and suspicious eruptions of plague in New Mexico. According to what he wrote, late August of 1949, biologist at the Veterans Hospital in Albuquerque called in stating that a man from Tacitus in Sandoval County had been admitted to the hospital. Clinical symptoms resembled the plague. The director noted that more than a few additional cases from New Mexico had been reported in 49, all suggestive of some form of plague being on the loose. And he said since this report was written, a 7.5-year-old boy in Lincoln County died, in all likelihood of the plague. He was taken to a physician at Fort Stanton November 4th. When in a very serious condition, he was sent home. He was taken back to Fort Stanton on November 5th. Temperature was higher. By noon, he was worse, and by 2:30, he was dead. Post-mortem was made. The doctor in charge diagnosed the case as being bubonic plague with pneumonic and septicemic complications. Well, Lincoln County is the location of the Foster Ranch where the UFO debris was found. The young boy was taken to Fort Stanton, and that's intriguing. According to one of the UFO researchers, coincidentally or otherwise, the Brazil Ranch is located quite near to Fort Stanton Mesa. And during World War II, soldiers suffering from combat fatigue and psychological ailments were remanded there. Researcher named Kathy Castron visited Fort Stanton Mesa and toured the facility cemetery. Noted with great interest the increase in deaths in 1947 and 1951 time period. Equally intriguing is the fact that the FBI in this same period began to carefully collect and review New Mexico-based newspaper articles on the sudden surface and serious and sometimes mysterious deadly diseases occurring within the state. There was one from the Albuquerque Journal, dated June 21st, 1950, referred to a two-day conference held at the Atlanta, Georgia-based Communicable Disease Center. The public health workers were conducting a survey on the plague problem in New Mexico. So you have to wonder what the FBI was after. Needless to say, the likelihood that high government officials, such as the Director of Naval Intelligence, the Air Force Directors of Special Investigation, the Acting Director of the Division of Security of the Atomic Energy Commission, and the Director of the CIA, why would they have had interest in illnesses in New Mexico? Roswell may not have been just the most famous of all UFO cases. It might have been the deadliest as well. Well, there's another incident that took place that raised a lot of eyebrows. That was the saga of U.S. Air Force Captain Thomas Mantell, who died in 1948 while chasing a UFO in the sky of Kentucky. Or if you listen to Project Blue Book, he was actually chasing a balloon or maybe the planet Venus. It all began early afternoon of January 7th, 1948. Staff at Kentucky-based Godman Airfield It was still an Army airfield at that time, part of Fort Knox. Noticed something odd. They saw a circular-shaped object. Well, Captain Mantell and his 3 companion pilots were approaching the base when the base officials asked them to see what that object was flying over the base. So Mantell and his 3 companion pilots, flying P-51 Mustangs, started toward it. One pilot, in the radio, he had to land, he was out of fuel. The second one said he was disoriented, and he needed the third one to help him land. And left Mantell by himself. Well, at about 15,000 feet, he radioed God and really could see the object and seemed to be moving at about 50% of his speed, which would put it about 180 miles an hour. And he said the UFO was huge. So he knew he wasn't chasing the planet Venus. He knew he wasn't chasing a balloon. And he ultimately climbed about 25,000 feet to get a closer look at it. Now, he didn't have an oxygen mask, so he was not having his breathing assisted. And when he got to 25,000 feet, he fell out of radio contact, and the object vanished. And 120 miles from Gottman, Mantell's plane ceased its climb, began to drop back toward the earth, slammed into the ground, full force. Of course, Mantell was killed instantly. Official cause of the crash, he passed out due to lack of oxygen and never came to. Now, this was a veteran of World War II. Had thousands of hours as a pilot. Well, he was somebody who had already been decorated for bravery. He was given the job of seeing what that was, and he was going to do it. Now, clearly, based on his radio conversation, he saw something. It wasn't the planet Venus. Project Sign, which was the UFO investigation study program, I looked into it. Their official verdict was that Mantell had misidentified the planet Venus. Thought it was a small-sized object at close quarters. Venus was in that general position, but that afternoon it would have been impossible to see it. At the time when UFOs were all the rage, U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Research had developed was flying some very large balloons under cover of an operation called Project Skyhook to collect meteorological data. And it was a classified program. And they were reflective, just like the UFO. Now, clearly, based on this conversation, he saw what it was. And it wasn't a balloon. And it wasn't the planet Venus. Now, in 1952, the Mantell affair was once again examined by Captain Edward Rupert, Project Blue Book. And after Project Sign, there was Project Grudge, and then Blue Book. Now, Rupert couldn't rule out the balloon theory, but he couldn't get any documentation, which was suspicious in and of itself. Now, surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, Rupert himself died in 1960 of a heart attack at 37 years old. I find it hard to believe. Now, in regard to the crash, one story said there was Mantell's body was gone. Another one said his seatbelt had been shredded. Still another story said he had been decapitated. Let's talk about Sergeant Rita Hill of the British Royal Air Force. Spent a lot of her military career in an RAF base in the English countryside, a county of Wiltshire called Bascom Down, where they tested new and radically designed experimental aircraft. In 1998, she made a statement that has to be kept in mind when you look at the circumstances surrounding Mantell. She said, when it comes to UFOs, everything's top secret. The pilots finished their test. They'd have briefings, and she and her cohorts would attend, all very hush-hush. Sometimes the pilots would report seeing strange lights and objects in the sky. They weren't called UFOs because that wasn't a term in those days. But they would say that when they saw these strange lights, instruments on the aircraft to go haywire. And there were always crashes of experimental aircraft. There weren't biplanes, there were jets. At times, they'd have a crash a week. And she was in charge of a crash crew and had 2 individuals with her, and when they'd go to a crash site, everything had to be found. Even the buttons off the tunics. Sometimes it'd take weeks to find everything. And from there, the wreckage would be taken for reconstruction. And everybody, of course, was sworn to secrecy. Well, as I was making reference to the death of Captain Mantell, one man with intimate knowledge of his death was Captain James Dusler, Deputy Commander of Godman Air Force Base, the day that Mantell died. And his testimony was important, as he was one of the first-hand witnesses to the unusual object in the sky. He likened its shape to an ice cream cone standing on its head. He said there seemed to be a black-colored band around the object that was rotating incredibly fast. And significantly, he said that less than 12 hours after Mantell died, another UFO was seen at Godman about 1 o'clock in the morning. The next day, a missile-shaped craft of unknown origins and giving off an orange glow was seen moving in an arc around the base. They never determined what that was. And then there were the comments that he made about Mantell's body. Despite the fact the aircraft had hit the ground from tens of thousands of feet in the air, and all of each and every one of his bones were shattered, there wasn't even a cut on his skin. The aircraft wasn't at all badly damaged, although the wings broke off on impact. And Dusler's view wasn't at all consistent with what you'd expect to see on an aircraft hit the ground with both speed and force. Well, everybody has wondered about that crash. Now, equally mystifying in that same general time period was the death of Secretary of Defense James Forrestal. He had died under very controversial circumstances. He was in Bethesda Naval Hospital for depression. It was decided he was a risk to national security. So he was stripped of his position as Secretary of Defense. All of his diaries were handed over to the White House for safekeeping, don't you know? And against his will, he was admitted to Bethesda for what was said to be his own safety and his own good. He feared he was being watched by shadowy forces. And a lot of UFO witnesses have reported the same thing. He developed a degree of paranoia. He began to see spying eyes in all quarters. And whether it was agents from the KGB or the men in black, whoever it might have been, he knew he was being watched. He was put in what amounted to solitary confinement in a room with heavily screened windows. He asked for the reason for the screens. The psychiatrist told him in no uncertain terms it was to keep him from jumping out the window. May 22nd, he did jump out the window. allegedly. Although there's no doubt he was in a fragile psychological state when he entered the hospital. Even tried to throw himself out of the car that was taking him to the hospital. By all accounts, he'd improved dramatically. Only 2 days before his death, he was chatting with Bethesda's commanding officer, Rear Admiral Morton Wolcotts. He was lucid, freshly showered, had a healthy appetite. While talking to the Rear Admiral, he didn't eat the steak, so his appetite was good. Everything was progressing nicely. And 2 days later, he was dead. Now, there's always an official version and an unofficial version. The official version was in the hours leading up to the fatal moment. He had somebody named Edward Priest, U.S. Navy corpsman, sitting in his room. Tell Priest he didn't want a sedative that night. He was going to read himself to sleep. Priest's shift ended at midnight. Robert Wayne Harrison Jr. took his place to keep watch over the Secretary of Defense. Well, he did that. That was his job. But then he exited the room to run an errand. And at that point in time, according to the official story, Forrestal tied the belt on his robe around his neck, climbed up and jumped out the window, landed on the third floor overhang. And his room was on the 16th floor. He used the cord of his dressing gown around his neck and tied the room's radiator, which was directly underneath the window, and climbed up out. The cord gave way under his weight, dropped to his death, rather than dying by hanging, if you accept the suicide theory. Now, there are a number of reasons why this theory is questionable. However, we've run out of time for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about the mysterious death of James Forrestal. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great